Establishing central presence, preparing for piece development and potential pawn pushes. Establishing central presence immediately, this solidifies black's claim and contests white's initial pawn advance, creating a symmetrical pawn structure ripe for positional jockeying. Challenging the center, white immediately sparks a fight for key squares and opens lines for rapid development. Solidifying the center's pawn chain, black prepares to develop pieces harmoniously, prioritizing safety before engaging in sharp play. Nurturing central pawn presence and preparing for queenside development, this knight stakeout gracefully solidifies the pawn chain's integrity. Solidifying the center's pawn structure with c6 prepares a robust defense and potential queenside expansion for black. Unveiling the queen to g3, this aims to eye the kingside while preparing for central pawn breaks and avoiding early queen exchanges. Developing the knight to a natural square, it prepares to castle and supports the d5 pawn, anticipating further central skirmishes. Preparing to fianchetto the bishop, eyeing that long diagonal and potentially reinforcing the queenside structure. Sacrificing the pawn opens a diagonal for the queen, potentially disrupting white's kingside development. Reclaiming the pawn opens lines for your queen and supports development, but be mindful of black's central pressure. Aggressively grabbing space on the queenside with b5, black seeks to exploit the somewhat exposed white queen and potentially gain an initiative. Repositioning the queen creates pressure on the queenside pawns and prepares for central expansion. Developing the knight here prepares for queenside expansion and a potential kingside fianchetto, aiming to free the bishop. Anchoring the bishop to that central diagonal prepares to exploit the queenside pawn push's weaknesses. Developing the bishop to the active diagonal fosters excellent piece coordination and prepares to contest the center. Castling secures the monarch, a vital prerequisite for launching future central operations or supporting queenside counterplay. Expanding queenside territory with a pawn thrust, this move prepares to develop the queen's bishop and potentially attack white's central pawn structure. Challenging black's queenside expansion, this advances to seize open lines and potentially isolate the b5 pawn. Challenging the center's pawn structure with c5 unlocks dynamic possibilities and forces white's queen to reposition. Striking the pawn outpost, white aims to disrupt black's queenside structure and open lines for his pieces. Unleashing the bishop onto the queenside diagonal, this develops actively and challenges white's central queenside pawn majority. Retreating the queen to guard the c2 square offers a stable position, preparing to contest the central c-file and consolidate the pawn structure. Unlocking the file creates immediate dynamic possibilities, forcing a decision about the open diagonal. Striking the rook opens crucial diagonals and prepares to contest the now unprotected file, seizing initiative. Reclaiming the queen on the queen side immediately stabilizes the position and prepares for active piece play in the center. Developing this knight to an active square immediately pressures black's queenside pawns and reinforces white's central ambitions. Preparing to unleash the bishop on the a2-g8 diagonal, this squares the queenside initiative and pressures white's central pawn structure. Sacrificing the pawn opens lines and targets black's exposed queen. Unleashing a pawn storm against white's centralized pieces, this pawn lunge dramatically alters the board's geometry and forces immediate attention. Reclaiming the central diagonal offers a strategic foothold for knight development, subtly restricting black's advancing pawns. Liberating the bishop from the cramped quarters, this exchange reclaims central influence and initiates a dynamic battle for the queenside territory. A quiet repositioning, this bishop aims to redeploy for central influence and pawn pressure. Developing the bishop to e7 solidifies the kingside defense, preparing to connect the rooks and escape the imminent queen attack. Initiating a direct bishop-knight tempo battle aims to disrupt black's coordinated piece network, potentially freeing the d-file. Gaining space on the queen side and forcing a repositioning of the white knight presents an excellent opportunity for active piece play. Challenging black's queen placement forces a decision, potentially opening lines for your pieces. Castling safely shores up the monarch and prepares for potential mid-game skirmishes, a prudent decision given the pawn structure. Recentralizing the knight prepares for future pawn pushes and potential kingside activity. Reclaiming the vital center file and threatening a kingside infiltration, this knight boldly enters the fray. Reclaiming the queen to its active post prepares for a central pawn push or a wing attack, keeping options fluid. The queen's repositioning creates pressing pressure along the file and eyes a potential breakthrough on the queen's side. Sacrificing material to unravel the king's defenses. Sacrificing tactical clarity for a moment, black retreats the bishop, hoping to consolidate the position and avoid immediate threats on the queen's side. Reorganizing pieces, the knight repositions to a more active square, eyeing central control and preparing for future pawn advances. Capturing the bishop opens up the king's protection and creates immediate tactical possibilities along the g-file. Initiating a knight maneuver to the center aims to secure the f4 square and potentially disrupt black's developing piece coordination. Sharpening the central control and preparing to contest the d-file, this move initiates a dynamic phase by potentially forcing exchanges. Capturing the pawn on b4 loosens black's queenside pawns and opens a diagonal for white's queen. A risky gambit, sacrificing material for initiative, hoping to exploit weaknesses around the king. Opening up the kingside diagonal for the bishop creates new attacking avenues. The queen's bold excursion creates a dynamic tension, inviting a tactical skirmish and forcing white to consider counterplay. Solidifying central control and preparing for further pawn advances offers positional advantages. Liberating the rook from the back rank introduces fresh attacking potential along the open b-file. Securing the queenside pawn structure now becomes paramount, preventing black from establishing queenside dominance. A daring gambit to seize central control, hoping to disrupt white's queen's dominion and expose vulnerable king pathways. Anchoring the d-file, this rook demands respect and prepares a latent battery against the black monarch. Seizing the initiative, this knight boldly ventures into the enemy camp, threatening a cascade of tactical possibilities. Simplifying the position by trading queens now prevents black's knight from becoming an unassailable outpost. Liberating the bishop from its pawn chain immediately opens lines and activates a previously passive piece. A strategic repositioning aims to reroute the knight toward the center or a more active square. Eliminating white's central knight opens up the position for black's pieces to dominate the d-file. Capitalizing on the open file, the rook now establishes a dominant presence, ready to exploit potential weaknesses on the queen side. Seizing the isolated pawn creates immediate tactical complications, testing white's coordination. Reclaiming the open file offers a fighting chance to disrupt black's knight's ascendancy. Centralizing the rook now exerts pressure and prepares to contest the open file, showcasing a proactive approach to the endgame transition. Securing the knight with a defensive pawn-pawn advance initiates endgame maneuvering. Re-establishing a powerful rook presence on the 7th rank aims to disrupt white's central pawn structure and create play along that important horizontal. Repositioning the knight to the queen side offers potential pressure on black's pawn structure and a clear path for infiltration. Reclaiming lost time, the knight aims to disrupt white's centralized pieces and potentially contest the open file. Repositioning the rook to the open file aims to contest control and potentially harass the knight. Repositioning the knight to f6 opens lines for potential pawn pushes and aims to disrupt white's pawn structure. A bold lunge into enemy territory, aiming to disrupt black's piece coordination and potentially exploit the weakened kingside. Repositioning the knight to a more robust defensive outpost, preparing to contest the open file. Repositioning the rook to the edge activates it for potential maneuvers against black's scattered pawns. Considering the passed pawn's potential, reinforcing the kingside is a sensible precaution against future infiltration. Shifting the king to the h file shores up its position, preparing for endgame possibilities. Propelling the kingside pawns forward gains space, but creates potential weaknesses around the monarch. Asserting control over the crucial c5 square, this maneuver prepares to blockade black's passed pawn and potentially initiate a king hunt. Repositioning the rook to the 5th rank aims to challenge white's encroaching knight and potentially create counterplay on the queen side. This knight repositions to eye the queen's pawn and potentially disrupt black's structure. The black king sidesteps the oncoming knight, preserving its vital sanctuary for the ensuing endgame. Capturing the rook finalizes material equality and simplifies into a pawn race, where white's queenside majority is now a decisive advantage. The rook's infiltration now directly challenges white's queen and creates a passed pawn threat on the queenside. Reclaiming the file with the rook offers a chance to regroup and pressure the weakened queenside. Pushing the pawn here frees up the rook and activates the king, aiming to disrupt white's consolidated position. Shifting the king forward aims to activate it in the endgame, though it might expose it to unforeseen tactical jabs.